Thank you.
Wow. Enjoy it.
Wow. Thank you. I will send that back to Molly.
Well, thank you so much, John. This is the 5th time you've been up here to Santa Barbara. It's the gift that keeps on giving. This amazing film. I right off the bat, I've seen your film so many times. I'm obsessed with it. One of the quotes that you mentioned is that the farm is energized by the impermanence of life. Can you tell us about that quote and how meaningful that quote is?
That's my favorite actually line from the film, because I think it's the lesson that the greatest lesson that I learned, and it's multidimensional. I mean, obviously, I was talking about soil and that, the impermanence of life in decay, ultimately is what informs the nutrients and minerals that feed all future life. And the other thing is that there is this humility that I think was forced to learn through the process, and that is to be able to let go of the things that I could not control, to really begin to go to a much deeper root level on the driving forces and the energies of the good and the bad things and the way I perceive them. So the impermanence is like the greatest ally of our existence. And I don't feel that I or my wife, or when we were farming, I don't feel we had to truly embrace that until about year 5, when we realized that everything we're growing here is all to go back into a state of decay and ultimately be broken down and, provide the nutrients and minerals for all future existence. Like I like to think that Todd the dog even is like he's buried outside of our house, but because of mycorrhizae fungi and mycelia that shoot off the fungi, and they're sourcing Todd's nutrients and putting them back into an apple tree that's 60 yards away. And that's for real. That's what's happening as these things break down in this sort of state of decay. So, I'm not a religious person, but when religions sort of get hone in on that whole that life is everlasting, I mean they've really nailed that part biologically speaking.
Mm-hmm. You talk about humility. Alan York, and I'm paraphrasing, he talked about observation, creativity, and I think he also mentioned humility, but. Can you tell us about that aspect of the filmmaking and also the farming process of observation, creativity, and humility?
Well, to be fair, I stole that from Joel Salatin. I heard it on a podcast once. The really weird part of that is I left out the part humility, but it didn't fit in the way it was written. But it was the experience, and I think that. Man, we just don't give ourselves enough credit for the time we take to understand things in the midst of great embarrassment. And I think what happened with Molly and I for 5 years was just this one embarrassing moment of failure after another. And, as I left my identity as a filmmaker, I wanted a new identity. And I really wanted to be able to call myself a farmer, if I'm really honest right here, sitting here right now. But I didn't know how I was going to get to that point where I would actually feel that I had earned that. And what I realized is that the more I just sort of focused on that observation, followed by creativity, humility cycle, that what I was doing is I was entering into this admission that I didn't have the answers, but I was willing to sit through the pain of embarrassment to try to find the source of why these things existed in our life and how to go deeper and deeper into failure to find to where there's this intersect that biology offers sort of solutions to hack into a process. And that usually requires several steps of embarrassment deeper than we're all willing to go.
I love the fact that you use the term embarrassment, because we as culture, Americans, are taught that failure, we have to be number one. Instead, you're preaching that embarrassments and failures lead to innovation.
That's, and I think there's a purpose to confrontation, and like what young people like Greta Thunberg are doing, and all of us who, if we don't like Monsanto, we're marching against Monsanto, and we're out in the streets raising hell for the things that we don't want and confronting things. But I think we have lost sight of the value and the greatest, the ones that are daring most greatly are the ones that are trying to innovate. And there is this culture around farming right now that if you're not profitable by year 2 or 3, that innovation is for nothing and you're a failure. And if we're going to find our way through this whole sort of reinventing who we are and how we interact with the planet, we have to accept the fact that we've spent 75 years ignoring how to exist with it and put it into this straitjacket to try to control it to do the things we want. So we're 75 years behind understanding how to operate this system that we have been given life from. And so I feel that the most important thing at this point is to encourage the younger generations and for them to be seeing us go through great leaps of innovation and extreme failure, because that's ultimately how we're going to get there, but we need to be a supportive community around that.
And which leads me to the next question you prompted me. How can the system be changed from rewarding those who use generative practices to regenerative agriculture?
Oh, that's a huge question. So degenerative agriculture is one where it's, we're all complicit, including myself. We're complicit in supporting agriculture that grows food as cheaply as possible. But the extractive method is what makes it so cheap, because there's not a regenerative process. So if you're under the age of 17, anybody under age 17 in here? Nice, yeah. I hope you hold us accountable to that, because we're kicking that can down the road for you to pay. At some point, we have to be willing to understand that these are finite resources, and that the regenerative practices will cost a lot more in the beginning until we understand how to work it. So we've got this system of agriculture that subsidizes, big things, commodity crops like corn and soy. And we talk about how regenerative farming, which is not true, that it's not profitable, but has a harder time making a profit. Well, we're talking about a model of farming that is not profitable necessarily without subsidies from the federal government, and we pay once, right, for that through our tax money. And the second time we pay is allowing them to extract methods that they're not renewing back into the soils for future generations to grow. We just paid a second time. They've destroyed biodiversity in the process of growing food. In order to kill one pest, they kill like 200 different species of bacteria, fungus, and other insects that calibrate this entire ecosystem. So that's a third time we've paid. I mean, I'm losing track at how much more we pay by now allowing ourselves or giving ourselves the onus of responsibility that we are here as stewards to regenerate while we take.
I'm quoting you, kind of paraphrasing you. One of the things I loved about your film is that you said, learning to love the land unconditionally, in the way we have to love people unconditionally. Can you tell us the practicality of that?
I think when we first started, we had a tremendous amount of we were putting pressure on the property to be something that it really couldn't be. And I think we still do that with our farm. Like, we don't get enough water to grow avocados. They take 45, 50 inches a year of rain. I mean, we got 24, and that was like crazy this year, right? So I think we're not perfect stewards in our own right, but I think that we have to be okay with the imperfections when we put those conditions on the land, and as it sort of informs us as to how short-sighted that sort of plan is, we have to be able to have that humility to say that maybe we've messed up and we haven't really planned for the future in the best way. I don't think I'm answering the question in the most articulate way.
What was
backspace?
What was it like? There were all these profound experiences and life lessons that are happening throughout the film. What was it like for that to be happening, and having the camera following you on an everyday basis?
because it wasn't until like year 5 that I decided definitively that I was going to tell people that I was making a film, because I also started to see the keystone players that I was tracking were the ones that could best articulate the arc of the story. Because I didn't want to make it, and I know that there's been people say, Molly's missing from the film, and in about midway through, and there's sort of some reasons for that structurally. One of them is that I as soon as we started getting too deep into the finances or to Molly's and my relationship, it would have taken a 3-hour film. And, yeah. And so now would be a good time to say that if you're a couple sitting in the audience and you're like, how did they stay together and go through all of that?
Marriage therapy?
Like serious therapy around year 3. We have a fantastic therapist, and I say that we paid him enough money for him to buy a summer home so that we can live in one home. It does work out financially. Really important. I don't know what else. After sharing that personal story, I forgot.
Which you've prompted my next question. The fact that I love the dynamic between you and Molly in the film, where Molly is this incredible optimistic force, and you come across as this skeptic voice of reason. Can you tell us about that dynamic and how you balance it in the film?
Yeah, it was really strange because I hadn't yet acknowledged that was who I was. And in the editing process, which we did incidentally on the farm with an editor named Amy Overbeck, who I've worked with on past documentaries, and I convinced, just incidentally, to move out here with her 2 kids and her husband to live on the farm for a year and a half to do this film. And I was sitting in there, we watched the first pass of the film, and I was like, is there something missing from this? And it wasn't honest, because I was presenting it that Molly and I were both like equal, like idealistic, sort of like all on board hummingbirds. And Molly's really the only hummingbird, like high on this invisible nectar that no one can understand where she gets it from. But so when I went back and I was honest about the level of pessimism, or sort of skepticism is probably a better word, back into the story, it became much better. And it was really hard for me because it was like a little bit of an ego hit, because I was like, oh, I'm not this evangelist guy that just sort of like believes in things. But I have this weird duality that I can convince people to do things, but secretively think that it probably won't work. There goes the end of my film career.
You mentioned that in the film that after so many years, you start to anticipate things in the farm. So it's 8 years in. Are you still starting to anticipate things?
Yeah. So people ask us a lot that question. They ask, well, is it easier now? And I'm like, it's not actually easier. We're just less scared of what is normal. Like, I don't know, by the time your kids are 19, I'm sure many of you can be like, oh yeah, when you get into the cycles, you understand, all right, well, that would have been the end of me, my nerves before, but I'm kind of used to what he's put us through, or she now. And I really do think that the ecosystem works the same way, that these rhythms, and then it's actually the game I feel like we play is how long can we go before we react? And you kind of try to outweight the crew and their patience to have the answer, so that we really understand deeply things. But in that time, you haven't spent all this energy and anxiety on busying yourself with the illusion that you are fixing something. And so I think we see these repetitive patterns, and the 1 year was the year of morning glory, which just took over the whole farm, and it was the year of the gophers. Before that was the year of like aphids and ACP, and there's always the year of something. And every one of those we thought, well, this is it. We're done. And then you realize, well, morning glory didn't kill us. Gophers didn't kill us. It would be really great if actually just incidentally, if we could start eating gophers, because we will be... why don't we eat gophers?
We've seen so many environmental documentaries that incite fear in all of us, inconvenient truth, and so many other documentaries about the environment that is all based on fear. Instead, you approach this very optimistic and loving approach to the environment and farming. Can you tell us about, was that a calculated choice or your approach to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think like those documentaries and those methods, they have a purpose, they have a role, but how are we doing? With each one of those films, we've become increasingly more, there's a distance, we've distanced ourselves from the problem because two things. One, we get so overwhelmed with the fear of it, we don't even want to think about it, and we want to try to make excuses in our life on how we're not really a part of the problem. And then the other thing, which is really devastating, is the polarization between political parties. Because we're not going to innovate our way out of this. We did it with the aerosols. There was a consensus, a bipartisan consensus, that the ozone hole in the ozone was real. And we fixed that. And now we can't convince people that the loss of biodiversity, 200 species a day, a third of our topsoil is gone in under 260 years. And we've been around for 4.5, not us, but the planet. So 260 is kind of like 2 seconds in a year and an annual sort of existence of the world. So we've done these great things in a very short period of time. And I think the reason is the disconnect. I read this book. It was actually like a lecture by Wendell Berry. Joseph Campbell's another one. You saw his book in the thing. Wendell Berry is All Turns on Affection, and it really clicked for me. That was the line. It was the title of his speech. It all turns on affection. And when people would tour the farm, whether they believed in climate change or whether they're industrial ag farmers or people that really embrace our role in nature, they would all leave and they'd be like, so it's all connected. And what I was feeling is this, that they were falling in love with this interconnected web of life, and that there might be more motivation to actually helping people fall back in love with it than scaring the shit out of them to make a change. I'm sorry I said that word, but that also is known as compost, and we build soil out of that.
So, John, I've been introducing this film for the past 3 months. I always say that you started shooting for 5+ years without expecting to make a film out of this. What was the turning point after 5+ years of shooting without expecting to make a film? What was the turning point that you realized, I need to make this film, and that I could have a film in my hands?
I'm sure there's other more profound things, but it was as simple as aphids, ladybugs, and ants. Do you know that relationship? This is like, I don't know, if you know it already, just bear with me. All right, so I showed it for a brief second, but I didn't go into it. So we had a huge aphid problem, right? And every year, we were dealing with the same issue. And when you look at the aphids, you realize there's all these ants around them. And ants are actually farming aphids. They're carrying their eggs around. They plant them in these little spots where your plants look really healthy and you're doing great. And then the aphids start sucking the nectar out of the plant. And then the ant, in exchange for protection from the ladybug, one of the many things that will eat the aphid, the ant goes up and taps on the back of the aphid, and the aphid squirts out honeydew. It's the mob, right? And so what we think you need to do is, we think we need to sort of spray and kill the aphid, but what you actually need to do is you need to get rid of the ants. But simultaneously, because you can't work with nature where one problem and one solution will work without collateral damage, you have to sort of triangulate it on it. So then we had to create habitat so that more ladybugs would be there every year waiting and around. So in growing cover crops, the side effect was there's all this habitat for ladybugs, so they were laying their eggs everywhere. So the next year, year 5, we had a complete obliteration of our aphid population by ladybugs. But simultaneously, we were putting out ant bait, which is a non-synthetically derived and organically approved ant kill. So I saw that work, but then I started having like this like recall of all these other things that I had been shooting, like what the hawks were doing, that I was knowing where the Cooper's hawk was every year and watching that the Cooper's hawk was putting pressure on the starlings. And it just sort of like, I realized I had the keystone players. And so at year 5, I realized I had enough of a story to tell that had never been told before. And there was also this guilt where I was like, what filmmaker is going to spend 8 years saying they quit the business inside the engine of an ecosystem, seeing all this and having the opportunity to get these shots in the way that you want to get them, to make them as cinematic as possible. Like, who else is going to do it if I don't? And simultaneously, we had Bodhi. And I was like, I have to do this. I got to do this for him.
It is an unflinching look at a farm life like we've never seen before. Were you aware when you were making the film that it was an unflinching look at an everyday life and that things could shift at a moment, and it does in your film? Was there anything that you were not allowed to show, that Molly said, let's censor this? And
well, Molly's reaction was, let me just get a text I got on the farm one day. Hey, John, can I talk to you? Yeah, what's it about? I'm really busy. I just heard that you're putting the birth footage in the film. She's like, who's looking at that? Fortunately, it was just Amy. That was one limitation. There's enough women in the audience, they're like, yeah, that's not funny, man. But I think there was a lot more. There was a lot more, death, and there was versions of the story that were way harder to watch, and I think I found the right balance that I think reflects like the truth of, like, obviously if it was so bad I wouldn't be here, Molly and I wouldn't still be here doing this. So there's enough like good that happens every day that it just keeps you going, and so I would say that if you look at it as like, if I take a given week or a given month, you could look at that and be like, oh man, that would be all the reasons why never to do this. But you can't take the totality of your existence on a farm in that short of a time frame, and it does help to see the film. Even for me and Molly, every once in a while I'll come in and I'll watch it at a screening, and I'm like, oh my God, is any of my farm team here? Just want to make sure I acknowledge them if they're here. But like, they didn't even know. Like, guys that have worked there for 5-6 years saw the film. They're like, didn't realize what we had done. So I think I know that's not answering it directly, but that's sort of where we come.
Yeah, you're so freaking eloquent. It's yeah. The fact that
he gave me this coffee, man. That stuff was the cold brew.
One of the things that I'm obsessed with your film is the admitting that you don't have the answers. And this is the biggest takeaway when I watch your film, that admitting that you don't have the answers to everything. How did you come around to that?
Oh man, we're gonna go deep, right? So
hey, really this is the 5th time we've done a Q&A.
Let's know each other just in front of 350 people. It was couples therapy. Honestly, was one of the things I learned. This really amazing thing, and it is like I like to look at it like this. All right, so if there's a bomb, and there's 3 wires sort of that you can pick, one of these 3 wires that's going to defuse this bomb. One will say, conflict. Another one would say avoidance, and then the third one would say vulnerability. The only one that'll ever, in my relationship understanding with Molly and the farm, is that if you don't choose vulnerability, you never get help. So the thing is to be able to admit that you don't have the answers so that people will rally around you and come towards you. And that's not something that men are taught. Like the vulnerability thing gets like, we were talking about this. I see you out there. We were talking about this. If I have a friend here, we were talking about this. But the vulnerability thing is the hardest thing because men are taught to sort of like pretend like, stuff down emotions, pretend like you got answers, and everyone else is like, well, she's got it. But I think on the farm, what I've had to realize is that like as much as I wanted to be considered the farmer, until Molly and I were like, we have absolutely no idea, then we were never sort of connecting to the collective consciousness of the people that wanted to see us win. And I got to think how to say this, but I think you don't realize how much people want to see you win until you're willing to be vulnerable.
Yeah. You made me lose track of thought because of how powerful that was. How fun or difficult was it to balance farming on an everyday basis and then filming at the same time?
It was really hard, and if I owe an apology, in case anybody's filming this, I owe an apology to the farm team because they were dealing with me in the last 2 years where I was so split, and it was really hard on Molly, and yeah, it was terrible. I'm still coming off of it. Like I found myself in the basement yesterday putting together shelves, and someone texted me and said, "Hey, how's it going? How's the film?" And I said, "I'm in the basement putting together shelves, and this is like the most peace I've felt in a long time." And I am realizing that like I grew up in a very chaotic environment, and the way you deal with that as a kid is you self-reliance and numbness. So I've insulated myself through the process, but what I've had to realize is that there was a lot of damage in me taking on too much with the film and the farm. So if I were to do it again, it would be done a lot differently.
In the follow-up question, there's so much creativity in farming, and you make the juxtaposition, at least to a film lover like me, that creativity in farming equals creativity in filming as well.
I find that there's so much creativity and problem solving in farming. I worried that I would miss that. I mean, the challenge of story is very obviously intoxicating for me too. But when I was in the first 5 years, when I was just really farming and I was filming stuff, but not to the degree that I was in the last 3 years, I was completely satisfied. I didn't miss the business of making films. I was nervous about my identity as a person, if I'm honest. Like, who am I? But there's a tremendous amount, and I think that's what I was trying to sort of convey is that there's so much going on beneath our feet and in the ecosystem, in your backyard. Like there's these birds that come to your yard that are the same birds. And if you really start to take note, you can start to pick up these patterns and start to understand these things that make sense and actually tie you closer to nature in a way that makes you feel good, like releases dopamine in your brain. There's this thing that I don't know, biophilia, and it's very different from pedophilia, so make sure you understand me. Because people say, "Oh, I heard that word, I looked it up," but that's not a good thing. No, it's biophilia. And it is like this innate desire for humans to be in with and connected to other life forms. And I like how they talk about it like it's some of us have it and some of us don't. And that is a lie. We just haven't figured out how to tap into it with the permission to allow it to be something in our life. But what I will say is that when you finally start to fall in love with something in nature, it releases the same types of dopamine that you get from making a lot of money or getting a job or winning the lottery. It's like the same thing. So this creative sort of process of understanding and cracking into that code is very rewarding as an artist for me. And
last question, because we have to wrap it up. It's been a few months since this film has been released, and every screening here in Santa Barbara is sold out or close to sold out. And the film is close to 4 million at the box office. How does that feel to you? And how has the ride been for you and Molly?
It's amazing. It's a test. If you're a filmmaker, you should definitely quit the film business, become a farmer, and make a film about it. No, it's been amazing, and I think we see it most. Like we launched it. We do tours like once a month. We do like a tour for like a weekend, and we announced the tour like 2 weeks ago, and we had 28,000 people hit our website and crash the entire thing. Sold out, and then once we got it back up, it sold out in 10 minutes. So that's been a real big adjustment. There's people now that we find driving on the farm looking to find Emma. She's still around. She's there. She weighs 650 pounds. She's enormous. She's fully retired. She's just enjoying life. But I'm worried also that someone might come and take her. But it has been really cool. And I think the cool thing, too, is I think we've connected to as a community of people that have felt this. And they've never seen it exemplified. Even though Molly and I are not the first ones to do this, regenerative farming practices have been around for years. But we're the first ones to sort of connect it in a visual way that people can go, yes, I know, that's familiar to me. That's what I feel good about. And that community is starting to really, come together around this film and not just support our farm, because really we can only sell but so many avocados and apricots. I see them supporting other farms that are doing things like this. And I want to just say that this is not about a perfectionist game. I'm not a proponent of a certification. I don't think your farm has to be certified to be valid and to be supported. I think you just have to be able to tell your story, and you need to ask the questions that feel good to you as a buyer. But this is, and I don't think we should shame farmers that aren't perfect in everything that they do. I mean, Gabe Brown is a really big regenerative farmer, and Gabe Brown still sprays herbicide like once or twice a year. Synthetically derived herbicide, but does that make him a bad person? No, everything else he does is regenerative. These are steps towards perfection. Like the Prius is not the answer, it's a step, right? Then there's the Tesla and these things. And you notice the Prius got cheaper, and so, which is good because, we are innovating. I just think we want to be like, this audience and what we can do here especially in California, we grow all the food, man, a lot of it. I mean, I know you got to go, but like 85% of what's grown in Ventura County leaves Ventura County. Of that 85%, 60% leaves the United States. And we got asked on year 2 to reduce our water by 25%. The well dropped 150 feet. So they're saying they might reduce our water by another 25%. We grow cover crops, and people were saying, well, you use more water to grow cover crops. In the first year, maybe, but we've never grown more or used more water than our allocation, and we don't get additional allocations for cover crop. So last year, when we got 24 inches of rain, our farm, while trapping gophers and all the other craziness that goes along with cover crops, we were able to sequester over 140 million gallons of water. And what we didn't use, what those plants didn't use, goes back into the ground, into the aquifer for Bodie, our son, to use. And we're talking about what is the economic sustainability of this way of farming. How is Ventura County going to grow anything with 50% less water than what we started with, like as an allocation? Like, it's a real problem. It's not a 3-year problem. I'm talking about what's 100 years down the road going to look like. Because I already know what 10 years is going to look like with water.
Well,
that's a terrible way to leave it. But the good thing is, we have I think we in this, especially in this state, we can make decisions with who we support and the food that we buy, and that's what's happening here. And I want to say that's what I'm starting to see, especially when we're down in LA, and we're selling to some of the restaurants up here and stuff. We're seeing people really support it where they can and when they can, and not just our farm, but other farms. And honestly, you can vote all you want, and that will make a difference. But ultimately, you vote with your dollar, and you teach your kids about the importance of soil and the importance of biodiversity, and that may be the best 3 things that we can do.
Awesome. So everybody, John will be outside answering questions. We're going to sneak out, but we'll be in front answering questions. And on a positive note, what an incredible, uplifting film you have done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.